And we've got a problem in this industry. There's not enough pilot. It takes decades to make a good pilot. It takes decades to make a good engineer. The average age is 46 years old. If we have that lag, who's going to come on to make
exactly.
viable, sustainable industry on all fronts?
Exactly. There's a shortage of aircraft. There's a shortage of pilots. And there's a shortage of engineers. And it's not just this year. We're short of aircraft to the tune of about 15,000, which is about 10 years' supply. Yes. And similarly, we've had a whole bunch of pilots and engineers who are now striding around the golf courses of the planet or working as consultants or who are not flying anymore. And the airlines can't get enough pilots either. So there's a whole bunch of pain coming at us with that mismatch that needs to be resolved.
Definitely. Well, look, as I always say, is to be successful at this business, you need to be able to have the speed of a cheetah, but the endurance of a wolf.
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, Jean-Marc Youkhana Ichard. Jean-Marc is the CEO of Uplifting Aviation, an organization that Jean-Marc will explain. But basically, they've been involved in $1.5 billion worth of aviation-related supporting transactions. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. We'll talk probably about some matters relating to sustainability, to the helicopter activities that Jean-Marc is involved with. And Jean-Marc, delighted to have you on the Just Great People podcast.
Thank you, Barry.
Tell me more.
Well, where do I start? Just an overview of my trajectory in the aviation. I started when I was just over 20 years old in the south of France through an apprenticeship as an aircraft engineer. And that lasted 6 years, where we were working one of the largest business jet operators, which the company was called Air Provence International. It was owned by Mr. Rosin, a prominent industrialist and businessman in France, who bought the business and flown those aircraft all over the African continent and in France. We had the biggest fleet of Gulfstream G1, one of which featured in Dirty Rotten Scoundrel, the movie. And we had a Caravelle, we had HS748, we were doing maintenance repair over all of those aircraft. And then we had, before the JAR came along, the maintenance facility had a sheet metal working shop. It had an engine repair and overhaul shop, mostly light repair and overhaul, like the PT6 and JT15 section. It had an electric, an avionics shop. It had landing gear, and we had all of the capability to do the King Air, the Dassault Falcon 20, working on all the Gulfstream G1, obviously. And it was one of the company in the south of France or even in France who had a phenomenal capability. And I learned there the business of maintaining aircraft.
And you were on the engineering side, weren't you?
Yes.
That was your entree to the
Yes, it was carried out through an apprenticeship with a special school called the Aeronautical Maintenance Institute of Crusade, based between Geneva and Annecy. And all of us who were studying to become aircraft engineer were in apprenticeship. And we had about 6 weeks to 8 weeks in the maintenance facility and about 4 weeks studying for 2 years. And some of my friends were working on airliners. Some of them were working on general aviation. Some of them are on regional aviation. Some on business aviation.
And then fast forward. Then you ended up at Hanson Sussex Aviation in Portsmouth, yes. Didn't you?
What happened was that during my apprenticeship, I realized I was a bit more gifted on the business side, and so I started to do the business school. And after the business school, still with the same company, I was the youngest, blessed to be the youngest sales engineer in France to go and sell the maintenance repair and overhaul contract for business jet. And then the company folded, and I realized that if you wanted to perform in this business, you'll have to learn English, obviously, because the Anglo-Saxon is driving the industry in any case. So at the time, there was an opening with the EU, the EEA, the Economic Area of Europe, and ended up coming here to UK 97 and work with Pratt & Whitney because the company Air Provence was representing Pratt & Whitney for the maintenance, and my boss was absolutely brilliant, and he got me there. And then when
So
I saw
now, how did you go from engineering with Hampson Sussex, or H&S, as I think they became, to founding Uplifting Aviation? What was the trigger for that, and what then happened? What was the...
I suppose the entrepreneurship drive always been within me, and I absolutely love that part. I love the engineering transaction. I love the complexity of it all, and obviously I love the people, the part of the people relationship building. And the time I had with H&S Aviation on a Rolls-Royce Model 250 program, before that I was working for Pratt & Whitney Canada, which was absolutely outstanding. I mean, working for the manufacturer is probably the best thing I could do in this industry. Pratt and H&S had a joint venture. And Pratt was meant to buy H&S, they didn't, and some of the management moved team, and I wanted to be on the field. I wanted to face the clients. I was too young there for Pratt & Whitney. They didn't want me to do that, so I joined H&S on the Rolls-Royce 250. One of the managers said, we need somebody who speaks French and somebody who understands business. Why don't you come? So I came along, and I was looking after the large account and, the Belgian army. I was looking after the French operators on the Rolls-Royce 250 program. We say 85%, not 90% of those engines were installed on helicopters. And I realized that helicopters are not just a means of transport. They're there to save life and protect life and, and carry mission critical. And the man and machine interaction was so brilliant. And the fact that the machine lives with all its components was very exciting. So when I carried on leaving H&S Aviation after 3 years, I thought, no, I'm going to launch my business, and I want to be an independent consultant and represent company for their maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Launch the business and quickly run out of money, because I totally underestimated the business.
As often happens.
Yeah. And then so
I
was very blessed to be able to work as a taxi driver for 1 year in Portsmouth.
Well, as did some other luminaries. Vladimir Putin was a taxi driver, I think.
I didn't know Vladimir Putin was a taxi driver.
Yeah, no, he was a taxi driver after Dresden. Yeah, or after he was in Dresden, and then when the Soviet Union fell, he became a taxi driver. Yeah,
amazing.
So it's amazing. It's amazing where you can go, where a taxi can take you. And so you then started this. So you started the business and ran out of money, became a taxi driver, and then what happened?
What happened is a colleague of mine who was working on the airline industry said to me, he said, look, why don't you go and talk to Mr. Marc Dubois, owner of Technique Aviation, who is a propeller shop specialist, absolutely beautiful company down Manosque, not far away from Marseille, So I contacted him. I'm from Marseille myself, so I went down there, and he's like a father figure, a beautiful, beautiful human being. And he said, look, Jean-Marc, why don't you come back? I'll put you as a sales director. And I thought to him, look, I left France. I don't want to come back. I love France, but I don't see myself, it's not the place I'm going to evolve. However, so I've got a better deal for you. Why don't, instead of you employing somebody and getting with the burden, why don't I become a consultant, work for 70% of my time with you? You won't have to pay much of a burden that involves in France employing a director, and instead we work on a consultative basis. We started, and the idea for him was to really expand this business. The propeller business is very much a national business. The shipping costs, sometimes some small propeller are as expensive as the repair costs. Therefore, in order for him to sell the business, he had to add another product line, which in this case was the wheel and brake, for airliner. He got into that, but he quickly found out that that's a tough market to get in. The manufacturer would not want you to touch their carbon heat sink. Was very guarded. So we together went after every OEM, after every operators, and we built it under his guidance, and we cracked it. And all the while I was there, at some point, a colleague of mine who was probably one of the best repair and overhaul sales engineer of all time, Mr. Albrecht Philippe, working for Standard Aero, came to me and said, Jean-Marc, we have a contract with the French customs on the Rolls-Royce 250. The gentleman in charge was my technical director at Air Provence at Aerotech, Eustance. Is gifted on fixed wings, and perhaps wasn't his first taste for helicopters. And he was assigned to run this contract. And in the end, they asked me if I could run it. And while I was doing the business with Technique Aviation, I took that on and built it up over time. And then I become the consultant for Standard Aero for 18 years. Phenomenal company. I mean, absolutely superb business. And the people very much family-driven now is becoming a monster of 4 billion. And they bought HNS Aviation, obviously. And so I worked with them for 18 years. And all the while, I decided to do two things. One, train myself to understand how to buy, sell, helicopters. There's no training for that. It's extremely complex. It's a minefield. So I've learned that and I started to trade. It took me about 2-3 years to get confident with it. And then at the same time, from 2010, I decided, okay, look, we need to understand the world of finance because that's what's really at the core of of those transactions. I always say the people who control these markets are the manufacturer, the financier, and the operators to a certain good extent. And so I've worked with that and I built a business over time and got involved with so many transactions. It's just absolutely brilliant. But the world of brokerage is so difficult, because there's no buyer of entry. Sometimes you've got too many charlatans coming in. Nobody always respects the processes of transaction and then the regulation and export control. The advisory is not always done. It never used to be done in a professional way that is like, care of the client and do the job for him. You work for the person who mandates you. And overall, it's fascinating because you oversee all of the assets, looking at whether you work for the buyer or the seller, but you're looking at the valuation of the aircraft, all their worthiness, all his modification, all his past life history. You're going doing flight tests. You're going to end up dealing with lawyer, financier, I know of individual, family offices, banks. You're going to end up working with superstar. You're going to deal with politician in some case, rare case, but it has happened in the past. I don't do so much now. You're dealing with any countries, any situation. And above all, you are the core of the engineer because that's where the battle is at when you actually sell helicopters. If you don't understand the engineering inside and out, you're probably going to make a mess of it. So all of that came to the fore doing those transactions. So sometimes you called in even an aircraft. You called in, so, okay, can you help sell an Airbus 350? Well, okay, I can do that. And then because you have that vast network you built over the years, versus on the airline or the defense industry or the business aviation, they know you, they count on you to run and you project running with them, where you don't have the ultimate expertise, you always can bring it together. So most of the expertise on the helicopters, but I can still work with people who work with jets, liners, or like I said, maybe the MOD or consulting contract. Because at the end of the day, is when you are lucky to be able to understand all the piece that makes the aviation. It gets really fascinating, and you meet...
You can say that again. There are too many moving parts in almost every airplane. But when you come to helicopters, it's a whole order of magnitude higher, isn't it? Just such complexity and such rigorous standards with all that rotary activity and all that energy sitting in that rotor. There's so much that could potentially go wrong and has. I mean, we've seen very publicly, we've seen it when it goes wrong. And so it's isn't it? I mean, fascinating. There you are from basically an apprentice in Marseille, and then dealing with huge volumes in terms of transactional value. But when we've spoken, you're always talking about the asset management, aren't you? And the importance of the banking around it and the financing arrangements and the leasing contracts. It's a very complex transactional process, isn't it, Jean-Marc?
Yes, very much so. You've got to think that these are mobile assets that work in a region. An airliner or an aircraft can move from one country to the other, from one airport to the other. Helicopters, not so much the case. You import to the country, you register the country, and if the person decides not to pay, you're stuck there, you can't do a repo that easily. Those machines are by birth dual civilian and military. Therefore, each time you export, you've got compliances and sanctions. Everybody can put a weapon on a helicopter, not on an aircraft so much. If it's in a bad country, you do have to be extremely, extremely cautious on that. Financing side, it then boils down to an asset-backed finance most of the time, in terms of mission critical. Those assets live long life. Because the cabin on the helicopter is not pressurized, you can have it for 50, 60 years. So the good thing is that the value of those assets increases every year. By the bare minimum of inflation, we saw over the past 6 years, it took 50% increase. With the inflation, supply chain material, and all the problems that we're encountering at the present time with the geopolitical situation, that's hard. And what that does, it pushes the operators who used to buy them out of contest. We can't go to the bank and say, oh, can you lend me 12 million euros to buy an H145 or 2 or 3 to support contract? Well, the bank might say, I'm not geared. You're not geared for that. So then you go back to the investor, the private equity guy, the lessor, who have since 2010, thanks to Mr. Santulli, who created Milestone with probably the blessing of Berkshire Hathaway's guidance, because he created NetJet, very, very, very sharp guy, and realized that after the financial crisis, the credit crunch, the banker walked away from colorful transactions like aerospace or complex transactions like aircraft. And so he saw the gap. He went to lift some equity, saw some debt, and build the business with 300 million and said to the big gun, look, I'll fund your aircraft. You can go after the oil and gas contract. That's what they did. And when you look at the overall fleet, the airline fleet, I think it's over 50% that are owned by the lessor. It's phenomenal. Where helicopters is much less than that, probably less than 1,200 over the 18,000 turbine-powered helicopter are under finance, and this is going to grow because the price keep on growing. So those who knows how to take the risks on those assets, if you're patient enough, they'll withstand the time 5-6 years. They can get a good investment, but they have to be extremely rigorous on the credit, on the risk on the asset, on the risk on the client. And we saw over the past 5 years one of the best lessor folding with 1.6 billion on assets at the time where the oil and gas collapsed, the price of the oil barrel collapsed, and at the same time they had an accident on one of the big helicopters, which also dragged all the lessor down. When they had a lot of those assets on their books, they couldn't put a value on it because it's not flying for 2 years. So the consequences are extreme, and so those people who are very gifted at financing those helicopters are very savvy in managing those finance. They are mathematicians of finance, and they know how to deal with those parts that involve risk and legal side, and it's not for the faint-hearted, for sure.
I love your categorization of transactions as being colorful. They're certainly full of color, aren't they? In that there are a lot of moving parts to make it all work.
Yeah. Very much so.
And a lot to think about. It's really asset management at its extreme, isn't it? It's not just depositing in a bank. This thing's zipping around with rotating rotors in mission critical environments globally. How do you protect your downside from that? It's a very complex.
I've been ever so blessed to work with the best gun in business at the top. And when you work with those people, they understand not only the risk, but they understand mathematically how to get out of it, as much as how to protect their investor money and how to apply themselves to ensure that there is a longevity and viability on their portfolio on all aspects, including the eco-social governances, to the point where when the banker, thanks to the net zero malarkey, decided we're getting out of the aviation, the eco-social governance, the social governance, the S in the ESG, fell back on the lessor saying, hold on a minute, we're financing those helicopter operators because without them, there's no mission critical. So it's part of the social, and we are happy to do so. Doesn't mean to say that they won't necessarily partake in net zero, because they also demand from the operators that they demonstrate how they manage their fuel consumption and how they manage that part that is a carbon output that they produce, even though between you and I, it's absolute nonsense, because if you look at the fleet of helicopter worldwide and the fuel consumption, are they really polluting? I mean, we're going a little bit too far.
What is as a percentage of overall global pollution?
I mean, the 2.5% in commercial aviation, if it's 0.5% or less in helicopters on things you can do without, coming up with solutions that are greener, that are utter nonsense, and I won't mention which ones are, is not going to make benefit to evolving on new technology onto the helicopters. Thankfully, some people understand that, and they understand that, if you want to stop an helicopter flying to stop firefighting, then you're going to cause more damage to the planet than you would having the helicopter, being operating there. We've seen people doing that as well, complaining in France that on helicopter based on firefighting, you had a Green MP who went and moaned about it. What do you want to stop the fire with? Just what do you want to use? So there has to be some form of realistic understanding of what that industry is about, and it's not very well understood by most.
And I think also the element is that we are an airborne society, aren't we? We travel globally, and the airline industry, I think, is credited with something like 2.5% of the carbon emissions. But then look at the technology industry, the IT industry. And AI, exactly, cranking out the watts there.
Yes.
And you're constantly fighting this in your industry, in your work, Jean-Marc. All of these variables, aren't you? The asset financing, the risk, the ESG side, the
Yes.
environmental considerations from third-party activists or stakeholders, and all the time also having to manage not only the operators, but the lessor and the investor's bottom line. It's a very complex. It's
complex in a sense that it's an ultra fragmented market, and a lot of people who are critical to helping country flying helicopters are getting hammered by the taxman, by the net zero brigade, and those people, their cost base is going right up. The engineering is, employment cost has gone by more than 50%, the maintenance by 50%, the helicopter by 50%. They don't get the hourly rate to go by 50% or 100%.
No.
They're squeezed out. And what's going to happen is a lot of them won't be able to survive it over the long run, because who can afford to buy now? Used to buy, before COVID, the same helicopter now, the single engine, like one of the most popular, the H125 from Airbus, you would pay just under maybe 2.2 million euro for it. You're now over 3.7 for it almost, once it's well equipped, between 3.5 and 3.7 probably. You can't always pass that cost onto the government on contract or to the client who retail purchase your helicopters. They are then competing with other form, like some of the drone and the BVLOS that will come into the competition. They are then a restricted area where they can fly and can't fly because people moan about the noise, or because they fly in a forest and then there is maybe an eagle there or something that they don't want to be disturbed. It's a dangerous situation because it's like the Concorde. Once you stop that, you can't just tomorrow build a supersonic aircraft.
No.
It takes 30 years.
No.
It takes 7 to 10 years to build helicopters. What are you going to do if you damage those people? When the country will be in an emergency, you won't have them. Period. You're just not going to have people coming and save you because you came up with this ludicrous regulation which are unfit for those industries.
And it should be pointed out that you're actually a very strong advocate of sustainability, and
yes.
you take the sort of the ecology matter very, very, very seriously. And how does that match with the for those who are listening, because it's very clear to you? How do you reconcile those apparently, and I use the word cautiously, apparently competing elements, which is sort of sustainability, and I'll leave the definition of that to you, and the carbon emitting helicopters and aircraft that you and I are involved with professionally?
Well, number one, a substantial progress that are made on everything that is surrounding the support of the helicopters. The manufacturer and their factories, and I'm talking about everybody contributing to the manufacturing, whether it's a part supplier, whether it's a tooling guy, whether it's a machinist, whether it's the plant itself, the main manufacturer, 4 or 5 manufacturers around the world. You've got equally the fact that those machines, you can recycle them constantly. They live 40 years. They are not produced in large number whatsoever. Small number into the thousands every year. Also, we have to invest in better technology. But to do that, we have to be able to make it sustainable in ourselves. When I say sustainable, financially sustainable. If you ask any manufacturer to put $1 billion on the table to develop twin turbine powered helicopters, they'll have to look at it. I'm going to carry that weight and that responsibility for 30 years. If you make it hard, I don't know if I'm going to want to do that. So you can't have the investment required to bring new technology to cut down on carbon. Maybe hybrid engine over the future, better rotor. All manufacturers are working on it and actively working on it in finding better solutions. But you always have to realize the dynamic of the beast. You're trying to lift a machine that is anywhere from 2,000 kilograms all the way to more than 12 tons. So you need power for that. And of course, at the same time, we have this sustainable aviation fuel that is developing. So hopefully that will cancel a little bit. It will contribute. We still can't produce the level. I think we're only 2%. We can't produce the level that we would need to make it much better. But I strongly believe that if we can really reduce substantially on the ground for all the infrastructure, and we can only look at the machine at the last mile, as the technology progresses, as the investment comes, we will have turbine that will produce carbon neutral or much less, or maybe hybrid engine and new component that make the helicopter much lighter. But they are incremental progresses. Why? Because it's all down to that ever symbolic and the most powerful thing in our industry, which is safety. We don't mess up with safety. And we've seen now new aviation called electrification of flight, while pushing for electric motor and battery. It's a good thing, But we also seen some of them who came along and tried to put a round peg into a square hole with sledgehammer, pretending that their machine is going to be the all be and handle of decarbonization. It is not, you know.
And the life cycle costs need to be considered for the battery, the components, and also the viability of the output in terms of the range that the current electric solutions provide, which is actually extraordinarily limited, isn't it?
For the moment,
unless you start, well, even if you go with hydrogen, hybrid, fuel cell technology, it's early days, folks, isn't it? It's going to take time. Yeah,
it's early days. The problem is that one of the problem is that the major manufacturer around the world have all been funded by government agency partially for the defense market and to bring that capability. Now we've seen the financier and the private equity or the investor coming in and trying to break down this market and come with new technology. The challenge here is that it's extremely hard to get a return on investment in this game. In actual reality, look at the eVTOL situation. They plow billion into it. We still haven't got, for the past 8 years, we still haven't got a certified aircraft. It's a 4-seaters. We still haven't got an infrastructure. You know, as I always say, when I spoke to one of the directors at Airbus once on an exhibition, and I said to him, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, look, Jean-Marc," he said, "the eVTOL business is the business of the people who create cities. It's like us trying to build we're not gonna build the electricity network ourselves. We just supply the helicopters." He said, basically, we wouldn't build a Formula One if you don't have a racetrack to get on. And that's why, to this day, all your typical manufacturer haven't jumped in full on. They have prototype, they have invested, they're very, very savvy, but they haven't gone, here's $1 billion, here's another $1 billion. They know that it could work, it will work potentially, but it's all down to the science. Science is for everybody. If you have
and the air traffic management side of it is in a city environment. If you have these EVs zipping about and in large numbers, how do you control the air traffic management of those airplanes, those helicopters? How are you going to do it, or the hybrid, whatever they may be? It's a massively difficult problem, isn't it?
Massive, complex situation, and my concern is that those financiers backing those machines are pushing for it because of the money, because we see the democratization of the airspace. Let's be realistic here. Helicopters are in small number. Okay, those machines, in order to make the business case, they will have to be in very large number. I don't know about you, but having very large number of electric flying machines flying around houses, built up area, you know, it won't take long if there is an accident for this to probably take a different direction. Regional air transport, I think there is a huge mileage in there. I think there is definitely a real business case as population are wanting to get out of the city and build ecosystem in a region. Transport in between those airports that are unused. Yeah, absolutely. But to me, the urban air mobility is dangerous as it is now. And the fact that they want to go too fast with it because it's all money driven is probably another challenge. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I'm saying please, don't go too fast. Make sure that it's more than safe. We don't know. They've gone to the point of doing all these tests. So the problem starts when you operate an aircraft. You've seen, Barry, you know, even the best aircraft in the world, new model like the 737 MAX and others, went really bad. This is with people who are in the industry for many decades, with expertise that are beyond comprehension, with the smartest people in the aviation working for them. And now we have this guy coming in, which is a good thing because of technology or breakthrough that they bring in. I welcome that. All I'm saying is that if it's driven by money and you're pushing it too quick, if you are an investor and you're listening to that, the only thing you're going to do is actually sabotage it because you're going to go too fast and you're going to create.
Yeah, exactly. And we are seeing the first of the clutch of failures of the EV aircraft manufacturers. And it's a shame because it was like they flew a little bit too close to the sun. Just you match a new airframe with a new engine and a new technology, and you've got a whole heap of problems. And also, certainly some of the data I saw a couple of years ago, where there were long white papers on urban air mobility. And what seemed to be omitted was that whilst the range was A, extremely short, and B, you couldn't actually fit too many people in one of these things, they hadn't really worked out how they were going to operate in all weather conditions. For example, icing in the eastern seaboard of the United States, perhaps a slightly different situation in Dubai, but you've got other features in Dubai coming through, like sandstorms and strong, exactly, equally dangerous. But getting an airplane up there and seeing a helicopter with urban air mobility vehicle with multiple rotors with multiple blades all going through an icing layer, possibly flown by someone who has got very limited experience, and then into a highly dense urban environment, didn't then and doesn't now seem to me to be a recipe for success. Certainly anything with too many rotating parts, I think, Jean-Marc, you'll agree, has got a degree of complexity that perhaps people haven't recognized from the outset from an operating point of view.
And that's the whole point. The handful of OEM who are working on it, and all of them are excellent in their own way. You take vertical aerospace, some of the engineers there are absolutely outstandingly good. And they themselves recognize that the level of certification should be 10 to the power of 9, number 1 billion flight hours for critical failure. And they're working towards that. And they themselves are pledging not to fly over built-up area, from what we understand. And they want to go regional to start with to test the model. And I think this is a wise thing to do. And it's good for their own industry. It's not, what I'm saying here is I'm not bashing on them and saying this is a stupid thing to do. I'm saying just make sure you bake the cake absolutely perfect. Because if you let those flying over built-up area, you can't afford an accident or two. The public acceptance won't take it, no matter what. The democratization of the air on a four-seater, to me, if you had an eVTOL that can take like an ATR, maybe 40 packs, yeah, that makes sense. But on a four-seaters, you'd have to fly the socks out of it, 1,500 hours. You're now having an airline on a built-up city. That, to me, is not a very good outlook, personally. But that's my view. Now, some others, take the Beta, for example, different outcome. They have a CTOL type of machine, and they did a campaign to start in Africa to trying to make hub and connection. And you could see a different application. You could see that they have an aircraft that can take off vertically. It might not be all optimal like others, but at least their endeavor is pretty cool. Those who are seeking the quick dollar return are the ones who are going to make a mess of themselves. Yeah, for sure.
And it was ever thus in almost any industry. Jean-Marc, where next for Uplifting Aviation? What's on the recipe today, Jean-Marc?
So the next on the recipe is working with many other talented consultants to bring a wide range of solution, advanced solution to investor, to lessor, to the PM, and to the airline, and to everybody who works there. But also, there's a service that I'm looking at launching, which covers the mentoring. And the reason for that is, yourself, buddy, we haven't grafted 50, 60, 70,000 hours of our life. We need to pass it on, but pass on the ethos that comes with it. And that expertise on how things actually happen. This is not ChatGPT. This is real life scenario, and we've got a problem in this industry. There's not enough pilot. It takes decades to make a good pilot. It takes decades to make a good engineer. We have maybe 850,000 engineers around the world, across the industry, across market. The average age is 46 years old, from what I understand. If we have that lag, who's going to come on to make a viable, sustainable industry on all fronts?
Exactly. And that's perhaps something we'll talk about in our next podcast, Jean-Marc, because and we spoke, for those who follow the podcast, with Remco Altus, who identified exactly the same problem. There's a shortage of aircraft, there's a shortage of pilots, and there's a shortage of engineers. And it's not just this year. We're short of aircraft to the tune of about 15,000 aircraft, which is about 10 years' supply. And similarly, we've had a whole bunch of pilots and engineers who are now striding around the golf courses of the planet, or working as consultants, or who are not flying anymore. And the airlines can't get enough pilots either. So there's a whole bunch of pain coming at us with that mismatch that needs to be resolved. So one to talk about, I think, next time, Jean-Marc?
Yes, definitely.
But in the meantime, from the Just Great People podcast and Jean-Marc Youkhana Ichard, Jean-Marc, thank you so much. It's been really enlightening, and I think probably an eye-opener for many people just how complex and colourful a transaction involving airplanes needs to be because of the current environmental situation in terms of banking and the whole ecosystem that surrounds the helicopter.
Well, look, as I always say, is to be successful at this business, you need to be able to have the speed of a cheetah, but the endurance of a wolf. Both of those are skill set that you can gain if you really want to learn it and dive into it and commit to it. It's a commitment. It's like a marriage in a way.
Perfect. Jean-Marc from the Just Great People podcast, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Barry. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. We do hope you've enjoyed listening and watching our podcast. If you'd like to join us on our Primer for Business Growth webinar, which is completely free, please just follow the QR code or the links in the notes to this podcast. Many thanks. And please remember to subscribe and like this podcast too. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Sixsess Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.